Not so long ago, our children went to school to be educated, not indoctrinated. Reading, writing, arithmetic. When it came to the thorny topic of sex education, it was traditionally a teacher's job to equip children with the basics to allow them to stay safe from unwanted pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases, and sexual predators. And whilst most parents were happy to leave the birds and the beads stuff to the teachers, sex education wasn't compulsory, leaving some parents the choice to opt out. However, in the new hypersexualized culture of 21st century Britain, a perfect storm of fear and opportunity has arisen. A new wave of activists and sex-positive liberals saw an opportunity not just to educate and inform children, but to sexualize and radicalize them. Unbeknownst to many parents, our children's education has become riddled with unproven, unscientific, radical sexual identity politics. The declaration of pronouns is enforced with rigor. Rejecting biology in favor of gender theory is the new normal. Exposing ever younger children to complicated ideas about sexuality is becoming an imperative. In particular, PSHE, or Personal, Social, Health and Economic Education, which includes relationships and sex education, RSE, has become a horror show.
Sex education is a good example. That used to happen in secondary school. The Conservative government, for some reason, pushed through RSE as a replacement for sex ed, and now we have relationships and sex ed all into one bracket, which means it's being pushed further down into primary school. We now have primary kids being taught about masturbation, which I think is inappropriate, and I think most parents would. But this is the slippery slope, isn't it? There's no age appropriateness anymore.
Drag queens, whose very names are often laden with sexual innuendo, are routinely invited to read books to primary-age school children. This is Miss Beaver, one of the performers involved in Bristol's drag queen story time. And in Paisley, a drag queen named Flowjob was invited to read books at Glencoates Primary School. Following a parental outcry when Flowjob's highly sexualized social media history was uncovered, SNP MP Mari Black, who was with Flowjob at the school event, lashed out, accusing those with concerns of, yes, you guessed it, homophobia. Mari said she completely applauded the school for putting on such a great day. Last summer in London, a Labour council invited a rainbow dildo butt monkey to host children's reading groups in libraries. Drag Queen Story Hour, which does exactly what it says on the tin, has now become a huge growth industry in our schools. However, the apprehension of having drag queens perform to young children is also shared by some drag queens themselves.
I have no idea why you want drag queens to read books to your children. I have no idea. A drag queen performs in a nightclub for adults. There is a lot of filth that goes on, a lot of sexual stuff that goes on. And backstage, there's a lot of nudity, sex, and drugs. Okay? This is an avenue you would want your child to explore. Would you want a stripper or a porn star to influence your child?
And then you just move your bum up and down like that, and that's twerking.
As the outcry about drag queens and schools grows, efforts by the left and the educational establishment to get them into schools will become increasingly aggressive, taking the lead from New York City, where Mayor Eric Adams pledged to continue the practice even after it was revealed the city had spent over $200,000 on drag queen events for young children. These extracurricular activities are bad enough, but most worrying of all is the British curriculum itself, which now teaches children as young as 4 about masturbation, consent, and the chilling concept of good secrets.
So this education comes from the World Health Organization, United Nations, SECUS, the Kinsey Institute. The first thing that startled me, made me aware, was the early childhood masturbation from age 0 to 4. That you know, I'm a criminologist, so child sex abuse and exploitation are my fields. So I want to know who is saying children are sexual from birth, who is saying children can masturbate from birth. Straight off for the beginning, for the 4-year-olds, they were actually learning about masturbation, which is now is spoken about, is called self-stimulation. So we discovered this in 241 schools in England. The self-stimulation has a barrier to disclosure, which means it prevents children from disclosing abuse. Basically, it programs all children in the whole of the country away from what we call a non-verbal disclosure. As it goes on, we look in children are taught to behave sexually in a non-offensive way, whatever that means. They to label body parts. It is not head, shoulders, knees and toes. It is nipples, scrotum and vulva.
In secondary schools, the menu is even more X-rated, as pupils are taught about anal sex, facial ejaculation and bondage.
Many parents are starting to ask questions at school, and the schools are saying we cannot share the resources with you because they are under copyright and we're not privileged to share them with people. First of all, that's a lie. To share the resources with a parent is perfectly acceptable, and any school that uses copyright as an excuse not to show parents what they're teaching their children should be questioned further.
Each and every parent, if they go into their school and they ask to see the PSHE or the trans inclusion across the curriculum, they will find their schools to be evasive. And that should frighten each and every one of us. Because if you don't know what your children are being taught, how on earth can you say that you are a committed parent to the safety and well-being of your children? You just can't.
But the area
Your website looks amazing.
Oh, thank you.
But why are sales so low?
Oh, well,
Hotjar shows your customer.
But the area of greatest concern should be the now widespread practice of schools teaching children about LGBTQ+ and trans ideologies.
As children of all are told that you don't have to be a boy, you don't have to be a girl. Doctors guess your gender at birth.
These ideas are not in schools to be discussed. They are imposed, and any dissent is not tolerated.
You're saying that what's wrong with the website is that there are more than one gender in this country.
That's your opinion.
That is my opinion, and that is an opinion which is acceptable in the school. I'm afraid yours, which you're saying that there's no such thing as anyone other than male or female, is not inclusive.
Scientifically, there are just two genders, depending on what
I get it,
gender
but you're choosing to make an issue of this, because I said, are you really going to hear? That was your opportunity to keep quiet.
I believe we are teaching children to question fundamental truths like biological sex. And then what they do with that is they then have to fill in the gaps. So if they don't adhere to the stereotype of being a boy or being a girl, which is something that gender neutral parenting used to be, that your kid, your boy or girl could have a pushchair if they wanted. Well, what it now means is it means that biological sex is not particularly important. It's just your likes and dislikes and what you like to wear that is important. So that is being taught in schools. In fact, not just taught, that is throughout the ethos of a school. So that will be in the canteen. They don't call your kids boys and girls anymore. That will be the receptionist. That will be all the support staff. Every single person in that school will have been indoctrinated themselves into then indoctrinating your children.
A common sense parent might ask, why are we teaching all of our children about such a tiny minority in society? After all, there isn't even any reliable data on how many trans people there are in Britain.
It's really a two-pronged approach with critical race theory, which has been a big thing over here in the States, and really tears down kids. It teaches them that they are bad, especially the white kids, that you are bad, you're inherently white supremacist. And then the gender ideology is introduced and kids are presented with a wide assortment of different oppressed identities that they can step into. So, you know, the worst thing in the world to be is a cis white boy. Even a cis white girl isn't looked highly on. But if you can step into, you know, a trans boy. If you're a girl and you can become a trans boy, all of a sudden you're celebrated. So it's almost like this conversion moment that teachers and school administrators are kind of guiding kids through, with the goal to help these kids become critically conscious, which is another word for woke. So it's really about, kind of dividing these kids from their parental influence and setting up this division between the parents and the children in order to make them little political activists for their progressive causes.
Rather than liberating individuals, tragically, data shows that trans people are among the least satisfied of citizens in the Western world. Whilst there is a question mark over their methodology, small selective surveys of the LGBT community have claimed that 40% of trans youths have attempted suicide. Trans activists might argue that this is because of society's non-acceptance of transgender individuals. Critics might argue fears of suicide are revved up to terrify parents and teachers to further their agendas. Regardless, those with genuine gender dysphoria deserve our support and our love. But what if the lifestyle itself is the cause of this depression? Which begs the question, why are we encouraging children to adopt the lifestyle of those with the lowest life satisfaction scores in all of society? The figures speak for themselves. There has been an explosion in trans-identifying children in British schools in the last few years. There is a term for this, social contagion, and there are consequences.
So we've had one example where a 7-year-old has come out of school. He said to his mother, I can be a girl if I want. And nothing more was thought about it until 2 weeks later when they discovered the teacher was actually in that class explaining her own child's transgender journey to the 7 and 8-year-olds.
Add to that painful testimony from those who have chosen to reverse their sex change procedures demonstrates that buyer's regret is a very real and very dangerous phenomenon in the trans community. Yet from within the trans community, these accounts are dismissed or even met with rage. None of this stops Britain's most activist councils pushing forward, forcing trans ideology on our children, even though parents are yet to be consulted and the government has repeatedly voiced its concerns.
And I do want to raise what I think is a very dangerous potential safeguarding issue that we're seeing in this area right now, where schools are inviting outside organisations into school to provide counselling type services and using their materials, groups like Stonewall and Mermaids who are teaching what I think are dangerous and contested extreme ideologies that don't have a basis in science to our children, and it's contrary to DfE guidance.
Later this year, Brighton Council is set to roll out its Trans Inclusion Schools Toolkit, which allows biological schoolboys into girls' changing rooms, boys into girls' toilets, and boys onto girls' residential trips. Activists are looking to Brighton as a pilot curriculum, with an eye to a nationwide rollout as their next goal, unless we parents take a stand. You might not want any of this. You might not even be aware that this is going on, but it is, and it is coming to a school near you.
Parents have no idea what's being fed to their kids in school. And I think not only are they being fed lies, which is that boys can be girls and girls can be boys, and their safeguarding being obliterated. So it means that any of their daughters can be in a changing room, and if that boy says he's a girl, he is then in that changing room, and schools are so gutless about it. That's dangerous in itself, the actual kind of things that will happen and are being taught. But broader than that, we have to think about what we're doing to children when we gaslight them and groom them by lying to them and allowing them or force feeding them the acceptance of lies as truth. And I think that does something fundamentally breaking to the soul and to the resilience and mental health of kids. And we talk about mental health all the time, but actually telling children to lie, how is that any better than the kids right the way across countries that we may scorn at, like China or North Korea, when they're also being force-fed government propaganda?
Some of it's activism in that the teachers want to shovel their agenda or push their agenda, but some of it is just misguided attempts at doing good. And some of the teachers just literally don't know what they're teaching and they download the resources off the internet and go with it because they feel like they have to address the subjects. So it's across the spectrum of difference of opinion there. But the issue is that when these teachers are pushing it, it's often not some people believe this, other people believe that. It's like this is the new truth, and they want to smash down normativity, as they'll call it, whether that's heterosexuality or whether that's white normativity. It doesn't matter what it is.
A lot of these ideas were introduced into education from a guy by the name of Paulo Freire, who was he's famous for writing a book called the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and his whole philosophy was based on the idea that teaching and education is an inherently political act. So he saw great value in education for achieving political ends. The whole point of education was to awaken a critical consciousness in students. And so his philosophy is like one of the most cited in education schools. And it has gone, throughout the US and I'm sure around the world with that explicit purpose. And so a lot of these educators are trying to kind of sever that bond between the parents and the student, and between the past and the student, so that they can inject their ideology and their worldview, so that these kids will become little activists for their progressive causes.
Critical theory, gender theory, critical race theory, queer theory, all of these really, really contested ideologies are being shoveled down kids' throats through PSHE, RSE, citizenship, and the likes.
Building your business online? Go to Wix.com and get your site up and running with a tailored creation experience.
Because make no mistake, business is booming for the LGBT and trans education sector. Brighton's toolkit was formed with the help of trans activist charity, the All Sorts Youth Project, which last year had an income of £509,000, including a £287,400 grant of government money. That means you, the taxpayer, are funding a trans lobby group that wants to change your child's curriculum to include their political activism. All Sorts host trans and gender exploring groups for children as young as 5, parents being offered a separate space in the building. Their activism goes far beyond gender ideology. Their terminology guides are littered with radical critical race theory definitions of terms like whiteness, race, and cultural appropriation. Last year, trans activist group Mermaids had a gross profit of $1.85 million. The Proud Trust, an educational resource that describes itself as the home of LGBT youth, received £218,000 from you, the taxpayer, last year alone. They flog information packs to schools at £75 a go, and they are eagerly hoovered up by activist teachers. Twinkle, a Sheffield-based publishing company, last year had a turnover of £42.6 million, offering hundreds of LGBTQ+ resources, including trans flag bunting for classrooms and pansexual pride posters. We are sleepwalking into a society where woke activists posing as teachers are grooming an entire generation into degeneracy, sexualization, and depressing lifestyles.
This is an attack on the family unit. Children are being encouraged to override their parents every way they can. They're being empowered beyond capacity. They're being given options that they don't understand. So they're being targeted by these flashy, fashionable trends that's going on, and they are falling for that. We've got young girls that they want their breasts removed. They're binding their breasts. They want them removed. We've got young boys who want their testicles removed. This isn't a horror story. This is a reality, and this is where we're headed.
You know, people say, oh, they need to learn that there are gay people, etc., etc. Well, they'll learn that in life, as we always have done. It's not a school's place to say this is right, this is not right. That's a parent's job. Yeah. The parent's role is to pass on values. Schools should be teaching the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. They should pass on knowledge, nothing more.
The nuclear family has been seen as an obstacle to this kind of Marxist society that they want to envision. And so a lot of the sexual revolution has been about tearing down the nuclear family. You know, they want us in kind of a Brave New World state where, you know, sexuality is just a transaction between meat machines. And so if they can cause kids to think differently, think in that way about sexuality, they're less likely to, you know, form a nuclear family unit. And then that, you know, vehicle for perpetuating the oppression is kind of eroded in that way.
So what can we do to protect our children and reclaim their learning, returning schools to places of education instead of indoctrination? Accessibility and accountability are key. In 1908, the Children's and Young Persons Act, known then as the Children's Charter, was brought about to protect the most vulnerable in society and enshrined in law a clear distinction between children and adults. I propose something similar to protect the children of today, the Reclaim Party's own Children's Charter. Number 1. School governorships are to become elected positions whose meetings are held in public where any member of the school community can attend and speak. 2. The immediate removal of political activist groups targeting children such as Stonewall and Mermaids from all British schools and teacher training programs. 3. The withholding of taxpayer money from said groups and the defunding of councils who insist on imposing these divisive and contested ideologies. 4. An end to the teaching of critical race theory and critical gender theory as fact, and a recognition that these new and controversial ideas should be discussed by, but not imposed upon children. 5. Sex and relationship education to return to secondary, not primary school. 6. The publication of all teaching materials pertaining to PSHE in education, granting parents the option to opt out if they feel it may be age inappropriate for their children. 7. The banning of all political flags from school, outside of the context of the classroom for the purpose of learning and discussion, and yes, that does include the pride flag. Finally, and I can't believe I actually have to say this, no more drag and adult performers in schools. These are places of learning, not nightclubs. Thank you.